Interviews and commentaries are for entertainment only. The views and opinions expressed therein are those of the individual speakers and do not necessarily represent the views and opinions of Sheranian Communications, KHQN, or Utah Valley Live.
And welcome to It's Not Your Fault with host Steve Shank and Kim Power-Stilson here co-hosting. Steve Shank, of course, is the author of It's Not Your Fault, and you can get that book this autumn, so we hope you look for that. Check out Steve Shank on Facebook, and also It's Not Your Fault Talk TV show on Facebook, and like us and see what kind of specials and things we offer. Now, today's show, we'll be talking about failure as the pathway to success. And Steve, of course, you know, it never fails to amaze me that when I listen to your show, I get these aha moments. There are these moments I say, okay, my life is going to get a lot better if I listen to what Steve has to say. So I love that this book is a combination of your 30 years as an entrepreneur in the industry, going from, like you said on a previous show, from starving to great success, and now you have a solution that helps the world. And thanks again to our sponsor, eFoods, for providing this show and all the information on it. Steve, how can failure be a pathway to success?
Well, let me ask you a question, Kim. When things are going really well for you, what do you change?
Nothing.
Why?
Because you don't think about it. You just enjoy the greatness. Am I wrong?
No, I don't think so. If things are going well, why would you want to change anything?
You wouldn't. But then invariably it always goes bad again, so.
Well, you know, there's an interesting quotation, and I think it came from one of the, at one point in time I published a little newsletter called The Sound of One Hand Clapping, which, if you think about it, it's kind of weird, hand flopping around out there, finding something to clap on, but it was an attention getter. But there are some things that you can depend on. When you are having good times, bad times, difficult times will always follow. And when you're having difficult times, good times will always follow. It's just the way things work. Now, you have to, if you can take a little modification to the way most people look at life, what if we planned our life before we came here? What if we are so magnificent that we were able to actually write an educational curriculum for ourselves before we came here and orchestrated who our parents were, who our friends would be, the fact that at this point in my life, this point in your life, we would be sitting here. Can you imagine someone being so magnificent in their mental capacity and their creative capability and their comprehension of everything that we could actually do that? And then you looked at the problems that we were given and understand this. I have a little plaque on the wall that I wrote during one of the troubled times. I'm more grateful for the troubled times that I've had than I am for the good times, because the only time I learned is when I got the 2x4 across the forehead that most people will recognize the imprint of it right across here. There's actually a scar. But anyway, be that as it may, the little plaque says, "Necessity is the mother of invention, but terror is the father of pure inspiration." See, when you have to do it, when you have to make it happen, that's why, oddly enough, our society is weakening our people tremendously. Instead of handouts, they should be given a hand up so that they can help to build their future. The dignity You know, there was a time in the early settlements here in Utah, there was a famous leader by the name of Brigham Young that was in the process of helping work with the members of the Mormon Church out here and getting them settled, and they were out here making the desert bloom like a rose, and when they first look at it, it sure didn't look like a rose. And they were building a temple, and the man was quite wise, and he had a pile of rocks on one end of the temple grounds, and they were building that temple for a lot of years. And when somebody would come to him and say, Brigham, I need some flour. I'm out of food. I need something for my family. He wouldn't just say, oh man, that's rough pickings. Here, let me give you a sack of flour. He'd say, you know what? I got this pile of rocks that I need moved from there to there. And during the time that temple was being built, during his administration, the story is told that pile of rocks got moved a great deal. But what did it do?
You mean from here to there and there to here?
Yeah. And it really didn't have a purpose with regard to the temple, but it had a purpose with regard to the dignity of the human being. You can't help anyone and allow them to just be helped without them losing something of themselves. And so what happens when we have problems? What happens when we have a difficult situation arise that we have to solve? We have to fix it. It causes us to do the two things that people hate more in life than anything else. Number one is to think, and number two is to decide. You got to understand, in our approval-based society, deciding is a scary thing for a lot of people. You might make a mistake, and after all, your parents, the preacher, the government, the school teacher, everybody said, don't do anything stupid. So a lot of people that are analyticals have a tendency to have a hard time making decisions because they could be wrong. But what necessity does, and what terror does, what failure does, is it forces people to say, oh boy, now there are two routes you can go when you fail. You can lay down, feel sorry for yourself, and whine a lot. I practiced whining a great deal over my history. I've got whine down to an absolute art. I remember laying on the piece of plywood covered with a sheet that was referred to as a Motel 6 bed in some little town that I don't remember the name of. We were stone cold broke, and I was trying to figure out how to make my next sale, and I was depressed. And at a certain point, you get to where you discover, well, if it is to be, it's up to me. And then you get up and you do something. You'll find me talk a great deal from time to time, Kim, about the distraction of action. When you don't know what to do, decide what you're trying to accomplish and just go do something in that direction. And just the action of doing something in that direction will require the universe to give you the inspiration to say, oh, well, as long as you're walking this way on the road, anyway, go up and knock on that door. Oh, gee whiz.
And is that what happened?
That's what happens. That's what happens. I was out in the middle of nowhere, which is actually Indiana, a little town by the name of Frankfort, and I hadn't had any sales for months. I mean, it was really troubled times. And Sherry was deathly sick. She had the flu. And we had one of these little hatchback Pintos. You guys remember the little Pintos?
Was it gold?
Had the hatch that would flip up, and if you had 6 kids, they'd hang with their feet out the back seat. You're driving down the country. I shouldn't have said that, but that's...
I've seen that.
Anyway, excuse me. But anyway, Sherry had a blanket and a pillow. She was riding with me because I was such a weak sister that I just I wouldn't stay out there and do it. And I said it's 9:15. There's nobody home. I've got these leads in my pocket, but let's just go home. She raised up, just as sick as she was, and she said, "Honey, one more door." Okay. I had stopped by this farmhouse, and I don't know if I should take too much time, but I'll make this quick. I stopped by this farmhouse, and it had a rickety old porch on it. It wasn't a covered porch, and I had to step across 2 holes in the porch in order to get to the front door. When I knocked on the front door, the glass had no caulking around it, and so I knocked on the door lightly, and it just rattled the glass. I thought it was going to fall out, and the gal came to the door, and she was a farm wife. They were not well-to-do. She was dressed in a chicken feed sack dress, and I'll tell the story about that later. And I looked in the door. It was daytime, and so I could see there was a fan hanging in the archway that was going tick, 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 like the old beat-up fans used to. It was hanging by a coat hanger, and it was channeling heat in from the living room into the kitchen where she was. And I'd made an appointment, and she said she was going to be home that night. Okay? Sherry said, "One more." So I went down, stepped across the 2 holes in the porch, knocked on, left Sherry in the car with the heater on, and she just slept for a little bit. And I went in, and I made my first sale in a long time. The man had 5 brothers, all farmers around the area, referred them, and I went and made sales to those 5 brothers. And in that company at one time, this was back a long time ago, you can tell by the amounts, but if you had $1,000 week, you got a great big ring, that you'd lay your hand down and kind of tip your hand over. It was just a big, big fake jewel in it and all that kind of. But it was an accomplishment. And after making no sales for quite some time, 5 sales, it was $1,000 a week, and that was necessity. That was absolute terror, and we just did something in the direction of doing it. So failure is what causes people to think, what causes them to decide. And like I said earlier, I started and I didn't finish. There are 2 things you can do. You can lay down and whine and cry and weep and wail and gnash your teeth and complain about what a miserable life you have and how it's everybody's fault, including God. Or you can get up and say, okay, I got to do something. And so then you start with the distraction of action, and you take that failure, and it always becomes success. If it is to be, it's up to me. Now in our country, we've got an interesting thing going on. I don't mean to get political on you, but the fact is that with us as Americans, we have troubled times. We're going into an election. We have people that are responsible and people that are irresponsible running our country. If every American looks at what we're facing and becomes active and says, if it is to be, it's up to me, but freedom is never free. We can take our own personal success and we can convert it to the success of this country. That's all I'm going to do on the political stuff. But it's an interesting thought. Think about it, and we'll be back in a minute with just a couple more ideas.
Folks, have you ever realized that freedom is spelled F-O-O-D? Food. After air and water, food is our greatest dependency. Taking control of that dependency ensures personal power, independence, and freedom. We can't control earthquakes, storms, martial law, dollar crash inflation, the global warming hoax, farm and garden restrictive legislation, job loss, crop failures, or the 2012 planet disruptions. However, if we have our own food, none of these can control us. Hunger can never be used to control you if you never are forced to stand in a bread line because you do not have your own bread. It seems the only freedom we still have control of is possession of food. If we don't control our own food, events are rapidly moving to use food to control us. Freedom truly is spelled F-O-O-D. Contact efoodsdirect.com or call 800-409-5633. That's efoodsdirect.com or 800-409-5633.
And welcome back to It's Not Your Fault, hosted by Steve Shank. I'm your co-host, Kim Power-Stilson, and we've been talking about the pathway to failure, to success is failure, and that's part of Steve Shank's book, It's Not Your Fault. You can find out more on Facebook under Steve Shank. You can also go to his blog site at steveshank.me, and you can go to itsnotyourfault.tv, as well as find us on Facebook. You can submit questions anytime you like and watch this weekly show right here. Now, Steve, let's get back to the topic we were discussing before the break.
Well, the idea that our failures are actually the means by which we actually succeed is kind of interesting to most people. But what I asked you earlier on when we first started this conversation, Kim, is if you're succeeding, if everything is going well, why would you change? The answer is that nobody does. That's why, in my opinion, now, you don't have to accept my philosophy about the fact that we literally wrote an educational curriculum before we came here, and we're following that precisely. But you'll find an interesting thing. There are a lot of things that point to the possibility that that philosophy could be correct. Here's the thing. Have you ever discovered that if you face an issue and you don't solve it, it could be in relationships, or it could be in your work. You have a problem, you kind of avoid it, and you kind of don't solve it, and you don't get it finished and done and handled so that you go, finally. That invariably it will come up again. Only the next time it comes up, it's going to be nastier, it's going to have more teeth, and it's going to have some real bite in it. And if you don't solve it then, it's going to come at you again. And it will come at you until you either break or you beat it. Now, let me use some harsh examples. And some people won't like what I'm saying. But in abusive relationships, if the abuse begins and it starts mildly and it gets pretty unbearable, and the abusee, as opposed to the abuser, does not find a way to solve the issue, it will get worse. If they leave that relationship and they haven't solved it in their own heart of hearts, haven't recognized their value, their humanness, their goodness, their magnificence, to the point where they put themselves in a possibly abusive situation again, it will get worse. And it will get worse. And it will become more and more difficult to extract the person, for the person to extract themselves from that. Now, that's abuse. Let me talk about weight loss. Ta-da! This touches everyone. Have you ever, those of you that have tried to lose weight, have gone on to maybe a program? There were some multi-levels that had great programs a few years back that people were losing literally tons through thousands of them. They were just losing a lot of weight. And then when they went off the program, they gained the weight back. And when they tried to go back to that same program, it was so much more difficult. They almost couldn't do it. And if they struggled and managed to do it again, then the third time, they couldn't. And the reason for that is we are masters of our destiny. We are creators. In our heart of hearts, we know that we have power over who we are and what happens to us. And so when we have one of those maybe abusive situations, when we have a situation with jobs and acceptance, when we have situations with young people trying to make friends, having the ability to go into a new situation and make friends and get acquainted and become part of the social structure. If we don't master it the first time, it will present itself either until we do or until we quit. We are not made to quit. We are made to master everything that we confront ourselves with, because it's our educational process. The magnificence of who we are is the fact that we literally are capable of handling anything we're confronted with. If we don't handle it, we'll confront ourselves with it again and again, and each time it'll be harder. But the reason for that is if we have weakened ourselves to the point where we won't face it and deal with it, then we have to give ourselves more of a trauma, more of a failure, so that we can succeed more magnificently. So the plan that we've created is absolutely wonderful. It's the magnificence of who we are. Now let me tell you a little secret. It's called the mirror technique. You've got to understand that if you take someone who is crying hysterically and screaming and hollering and just so distraught that they can't stand it, you grab them by the shoulders and you put them in front of a mirror and tell them and force them to look at themselves. 99 chances out of 100, they will not be able, if they look at themselves, they will not be able to continue to cry and be distraught. We cannot, as human beings, as the magnificent beings that we are, allow ourselves to be seen by us as something less than magnificent. If you don't believe it, go prop yourself on your dresser in front of your bedroom mirror tonight and look into your eyes until you see who you are, and you will know that what I'm telling you is the absolute truth. That's you. That's you. There's a story about a fellow that was a commercial salesman that would take his clients out, and he'd wine them and dine them and wine them some more and then wine them a little bit more until they were all kind of blotto. Then he'd excuse himself and go up to his room and prop himself on the dresser in front of his mirror and talk to himself until he was sober, and then go back and take advantage of the guys and sell them and make the sale. Now, I'm not telling you to do that type of thing, but I'm telling you that the mirror technique is absolutely wonderful, because you can talk right to your very soul. And you can fill your subconscious with your stuff that you are grateful for receiving in relationships, in success business-wise, in success with your family, in school, or whatever you're trying to accomplish. You are the master of your destiny. But understanding that when you get hit across the head with a 2x4, that's you. That's you putting yourself in the way of an education that says, dummy, you can do more than this. You have you are not achieving what you're capable of. Here's a failure to scare you to death and beat you up and make you feel miserable so that you come back and say, I didn't like that. That kind of stunk. And then necessity is the mother of invention. But you see, if you're hit really hard, if the trial is really difficult, terror is the father of pure inspiration, and you will come up with something that is absolutely astounding to you and anyone around you. But that's the magnificence of who we as human beings are. You got to understand that we are here, every one of us, for a magnificent purpose. You might say, hey, I'm just a housewife. Or you might say, oh, I'm just a warehouse worker. No. It's not about what you do. It's about who you do it with and how you do it and how magnificently you carry whatever it is you're trying to accomplish. This is about the idea that it's not your fault is a beautiful concept. The most important thing that you can do is to make those around you say to themselves about you, I like me best when I'm with that person. That husband that you thought was a gem but turned out to be a lump of coal, kind of dirty and not worth much, that's okay. How he feels and how you set your objectives and goals and the difficulties that you have faced, confront them, deal with them. And we're talking about how to give each other an it's not your fault. That's the greatest gift you can give anyone. Because remember one thing, nobody ever does anything intentionally stupid. Can't happen. And if you have any doubts about who you are and what your magnificence is, go and do what I suggested. Look in the mirror. Before I went out on my sales calls every night for a lot of years, I'd prop myself up on the dresser mirror in my hotel room and say, Stephen, you are the greatest salesman in the world. You emit an aura of absolute strength. You find the right people at the right time that want, need, and appreciate what you have to offer. And you deal honorably with everyone you meet. And I said that until I felt the strength that I needed to go and help save lives by putting food in people's homes. This is what we do. This is who we are. And this is what is so exciting about the fact that failure truly is the most magnificent path to success and magnificence that we can possibly find. That's the truth.
Steve, bravo. Thank you so much. And for those who want to read your book, you can grab it on Amazon and at your local bookstores. It's Not Your Fault by Steve Shank. You can find out more information on Facebook, and as well, check out steveshank.me and It's Not Your Fault Talk TV. Thank you so much for joining us, and please join Steve Shank again next week on the It's Not Your Fault show. Now, in the meantime, don't forget you can send your questions to Steve and also asktheguardian@gmail.com. Send your questions in, and Steve will answer those on the show, just like the one that we did today about failure and success. So is failure really the pathway to success? And apparently, yes. So
it sure is.
Thank you so much, Steve, and thank you so much for watching. Please join us again next week.
Thank you.